This is your city.
Stay tuned for Indy in the 50s. It just sat there, idle. The roar coming from the Indianapolis Motor Speedway had put this city on the map, but a world war silenced the famous oval.
And over a period of the 4 years, weeds began to grow up on the main straightaway, in fact, well, all around the track, because the main straightaway was still of bricks and mortar. The locals just came to accept that the track was done for.
Like the Speedway, Indianapolis is dormant during the 4 years the United States is involved in World War II. And what activity there is centers around the war effort. Not far from the Speedway, Allison swings into full-time war production, building aircraft engines. People are encouraged to plant victory gardens, and they watch the Indians play at Victory Field. These are scarce times. Food is rationed. Still reeling from a major depression, Indianapolis residents salvage scrap metal and rubber. They attend bond rallies. When peace breaks out, thousands rush to Monument Circle. Many of them jump into the fountains during a celebration that lasts well into the night. The giant V hung outside L.S. Ayres department store symbolizes victory. It's also a signal to war-weary customers to start buying again. The people who ran to Monument Circle on VJ Day also ran headlong into a new era. They bought suburban homes and shiny new cars. They hopped on newly constructed expressways and drove straight into the 1950s, a decade that would produce the so-called silent generation, but made quite a racket getting there. Hi, I'm Mike Ahern, inviting you to join me as we recall that remarkable time. Do you remember driving into the teepee? Do you remember a rookie named Foyt? Or when Shortridge was still a high school? Do you remember when the Circle was truly the center of town? Do you remember Indianapolis in the 1950s?
Indy in the 50s is made possible in part by viewers like you and by Stuart Richardson and Associates, providing court reporting services to the legal community of Indiana.
Hi. Come on in. I'm Alex Clark, your mayor. We have something we want to tell you, something of which we are justly proud. You know, Indianapolis, your city and mine, is a great city, the greatest in the world.
I think there existed in the minds of many people what I call a veteran's utopia, a belief that the veteran who had gone away as a GI to war was entitled to come back to the United States and to live in a world that wouldn't be the dark, gray world of the Depression, wouldn't be the dark world of austerity and rationing during the war. There'd be a new, bright America with the things that the veterans wanted most.
Everything was going to be good now. You know, we had passed the test, and now we deserve everything to be good.
And it seemed as if Indianapolis wasn't good enough or big enough for the returning veteran.
And of course, the veterans were all cooped up. You know, they'd been in apartments, they'd been in rental housing, they'd been in rooms, they'd been all kinds of places. They needed a home of their own, they needed a yard, they needed grass, they needed a place for their kids to play.
Oh, you mean that little one-bedroom trailer we pulled from New Mexico?
Air Force veteran Bill Hickman and his wife Peggy came to Indianapolis looking to buy into the American dream. And Bill Jennings was looking to fulfill it.
Well, it was really pathetic as far as
people being able to buy homes that they could afford. And so we tried to meet the demand, and it worked out real well.
Bill Jennings moved Indianapolis out to the burbs. Seeing a need for low-cost housing and lots of it, Jennings, along with partner John Lookabill and a handful of other developers, took farmland on what was then the far west side of Indianapolis and carved out a whole new way of life, suburbia. Jennings first went out to see New York businessman Bill Levitt and to study his fabled Levitttown housing development on Long Island. Back in Indianapolis, Jennings and Lookabill headquartered their J&L Realty in a farmhouse along rural West 30th Street and proceeded to sell what they called subdivided lots. The Eagledale subdivision was to become Indianapolis's largest and among the first of its kind. J&L and the other developers planned to build as many as 500 prefabricated aluminum-sided homes. Vale Harless was one of the sales managers.
Well, the basic layout was 3 bedrooms. On the average home was 3 bedrooms, 1 bath, and from about 900 to 1,000 square feet.
At Eagledale, the engineers didn't simply extend the city's existing grid system. Instead, the streets curved and meandered, or perhaps ended in what developers called a cul-de-sac. Although there wasn't much novelty when it came to design, people just didn't seem to care that they lived in the same type of house as their next-door neighbor and their next-door neighbor.
We were putting up 4 a day. We'd complete the house in 26 days.
They built homes at a furious pace, one after another, in an assembly line fashion.
We could hardly believe it ourselves. You know, the houses were just being completed, just boom, 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 right down the road.
Young couples were literally lining up to get into a new Eagledale home.
One of my salesmen saw this horde of people coming in with their little children, you know. We had games and little rides and drinks and stuff for the kids. And he laughed and yelled, "Hey, buyers over here and lookers over here." You know, he didn't want to waste any time with someone who wasn't serious.
The Hickmans were among those people who lined up to tour a model home at Eagledale.
And it didn't look like a mansion after living in a 1-bedroom trailer. It just looked so big, I just couldn't imagine it. And all the fine furniture they had displayed in it.
Ann Hickman, a returning vet, was armed with something that made his mansion affordable, the GI Bill of Rights.
Well, for the common man, the GI Bill allowed a veteran could get into the property with no down payment. None.
Affordable housing was part of the veterans' utopia.
$11,500.
No down payment, just closing costs. Don't ask me how much that was, because I forgot.
$350.
All the Hickmans needed was 900 square feet to call home.
Well, at first it was kind of like we were lost. There was so much room, and we couldn't really believe it. This is our living room. This is my chair. This is Buddy's chair. And we sit here in the evening and watch television.
And I think for many people, the recent memory of the city was clad in those drab, gray colors. And suddenly suburbia looked bright. It looked green. It looked white. It had all the colors of the new automobile finishes.
We're originally from Tennessee, and when we told our people down home about it, they thought we were really upsized because we could afford a new house. But we didn't tell them we just paid $350 down on a new house. But everybody out here was really happy because all of us had children, and we all built fences. And so we had children and fences and homes, and that was what it really took to make Eagledale start in 1955.
Bill Hickman had something else that nearly every other suburbanite had, a stable job. Bill, like many of his Eagledale neighbors, worked over at nearby Allison's, a division of the world's largest corporation, General Motors. Allison transmissions were sent up to Detroit and fit into big GM cars. In the early 50s, another of the world's largest companies, AT&T, chose Indianapolis to base its Western Electric division.
We have chosen Indianapolis because of its strategic geographical location. Its friendly, energetic people who in 50 years have created an industrial pattern in the Midwestern Farm Belt.
Industry and jobs were created out of Midwestern farmland along rural Shadeland Avenue.
Bulldozers and earth movers were transforming farmland into factory.
Just across the street from Western Electric, another Detroit auto giant, Chrysler, built a huge factory and employed thousands to make auto parts. Following Chrysler's lead, Ford built a gigantic parts factory in Indianapolis. And even Uncle Sam tapped into the large Indianapolis workforce. The U.S. Army dedicated its finance center at Fort Benjamin Harrison. Occupying 1.5 million square feet, it was this city's third largest employer, not to mention one of the world's largest office buildings. And what Western Electric built on that farmland was no smaller than the world's largest telephone factory.
Within this plant are being built the nation's telephones, helping to give this country the best telephone service in the world. Stamping, punching, assembling, testing, making telephones.
There were plenty of jobs to go around Indianapolis in the 1950s. Thousands would stay employed at the Detroit auto divisions. That is, as long as America maintained its love affair with big cars. Thousands more would keep jobs at Fort Bend. That is, as long as this country maintained a large military defense. And 8,000 workers would have jobs at Western Electric. That is, as long as AT&T maintained its monopoly on phone service. It seemed as if Indianapolis workers would always have jobs.
All of a sudden, in the post-war period, we have tremendous growth in business industry, jobs, wealth, income increases, people moving to the suburbs, new homes, two-car families start to emerge, all the technology starts to come into the home, and so on.
Well, it was there. I mean, you had money. It seemed like everybody was working. You know, first you bought a car, you bought the necessities, a car and a house, and there was money left over.
I feel like I really come up in the world because I had a washer and dryer. And I had a lot of friends that didn't have. Maybe I had better credit.
Well, that's just a regular mixmaster mixer with a, what I call the early Cuisinart attachment on it.
Well, at that time, you could buy just about what you could afford to buy.
If you had money.
If you had enough money to buy it, or good enough credit.
Popcorn maker, electric popcorn maker. Well, that's a whirring blender. Makes cocktails, malts, whatever, and this is the early 50s model.
With steady jobs, disposable income, and new homes, suburbanites went about buying stuff to put in those homes.
Hoover Constellation vacuum cleaner I've got pretty much looks like a satellite.
When shoppers moved out to the suburbs, so did the shops. Suburban strip malls made their introduction to Indianapolis in 1956 when the Meadows Shopping Center opened on East 38th Street. And out on East Washington Street, the Eastgate Shopping Center offered convenient one-stop shopping. Interestingly, one young entrepreneur recently stationed at Fort Benjamin Harrison accepted a civilian job leasing store space at Eastgate. His name? Melvin Simon. In time, he would go on to own Eastgate, as well as many other malls. Not surprisingly, one of the first strip malls was developed right next to one of the largest suburban developments. The Eagledale Shopping Center offered branches of downtown stores, a supermarket, and, of course, plenty of parking.
When Eagledale opened, I mean, goodness gracious, I mean, we had all kinds of places over there, and it just seemed like that. I think we shot more than we need to shop there because it was so close and convenient for us to do it.
And in the mid-50s, there were rumors of an even larger mall near Broad Ripple. Glendale, they said, would have big department stores like L.S. Ayres and Block's, comparable to the downtown stores. It was all part of a grand scheme, a new way of living called suburbia. And all it took was 900 square feet, a place to call home.
It's not really the best, but it's home. And it's comfortable and all like that. And it's going to do till I get to my new home because Jesus has got to prepare a home for us. And he'll come back and we'll have a mansion one day. We don't have it now, but one day we expect a mansion, don't we, buddy?
Yes.
The American dream came true for tens of thousands of Indianapolis residents. Many had well-paying jobs. They were able to buy all kinds of things and install those creature comforts into homes of their very own. Everything seemed to be getting bigger and better. But not everyone was allowed to buy into the American dream, and the decade certainly wasn't without its problems.
In the 1950s, virtually every level of endeavor, every level of social intercourse, every level of education, every level of cultural exchange was virtually and totally segregated.
We were always told there were certain things you couldn't do, like go downtown. Even if you could go downtown, you were not welcomed in a lot of the restaurants and the movies. You didn't have any money. I think in order to move and expand and go around the city, you need money to do that.
Few African Americans held the kinds of jobs at the kinds of wages where they might be able to afford a new home in the suburbs. In some cases, colored people, as they were referred to in the 1950s, were deliberately blocked from buying homes in white neighborhoods. African Americans, for the most part, lived in the inner city in places like Lockfield Gardens around Indiana Avenue. However, a rich culture flourished, and Flanner House, a social service agency, was able to build new homes for some African Americans. A strange sickness visited Indianapolis in the early 1950s. Polio, a contagious disease, promised paralysis, but no cure. When a vaccine was finally discovered, the U.S. government called upon one of this country's largest pharmaceutical firms, Indianapolis's Eli Lilly and Company, to rush the precious treatment all over the world. So, a crippling disease could not even stand between us and prosperity. The 1950s were well underway. Even the Speedway was spared from the weeds that threatened to crumble its bricks during the war. Terre Haute businessman Anton Tony Holman bought the Indianapolis Motor Speedway from Eddie Rickenbacker late in 1945. Holman acted quickly to prepare the dilapidated track for a planned 500-mile race the following May, the first one in 4 years. According to historian Donald Davidson, the Speedway's property value began to climb right after the war. He says that had Rickenbacker not been able to find a suitable buyer in Holman, the city's most famous landmark could have been a victim of the post-war boom and suburbanization. That is, the Indianapolis Motor Speedway could very well have become another section of Eagledale, which, if you look at this photo taken in the early 50s, was built right up to the Speedway's turn number 3. Stay tuned next as we go back to high school. Then we'll jump into one of those flashy new cars and take a few laps around the drive-in. That's coming up next when we go back to Indy in the 50s.
From the brilliant new General Motors line for 1955. Chevrolet Bel Air Sport Coupe.
The returning vet had to find a way to get from his new suburban home and over to his stable job, so naturally he bought himself a new car. And those cars were not only functional, they had style. Car makers were promising more than just a dependable ride. They were promising a new personality, a different attitude. Suddenly, bright colors and two-tone paint jobs began to roll off the assembly lines.
Because each year, car makers have to come up with improvements, so plenty of people will turn in a good car for a better car.
General Motors designer Harley Earl literally changed the way we looked at cars when he added fins and more chrome than was structurally necessary. The other car companies followed suit.
Looked like they were doing 50 mile an hour just sitting at the curb. They were built to look pretty. Today they're built to be fuel efficient and slip through the air as slick as possible, so they're all the same shape.
In the 50s, most everyone went to a downtown dealership to buy a car. You could have driven a car just like Dale Mortenbeck's 1955 Ford Sunliner, straight off Foxworthy Ford's downtown showroom floor for $2,375. Also in 1955, over at Superior Chevrolet, you could have picked up Harley Earl's latest work of art, the Chevy Bel Air, for $2,166.
Why, I'm beginning to think it's darn patriotic if we buy a new car.
And more people could afford to park one of these chrome beauties in their garage. In fact, some families were even able to afford that second car. And sometimes that first car was handed down to another member of the family, to a younger man or woman who wanted to drive over to the teepee or the rendezvous for a Coke. That young man or woman was another product of the World War II veteran. Today we know them as baby boomers. Back then, we just considered ourselves high school teenagers.
And it's rah, 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 9 rounds for Shortridge and his team, rah, rah. See why I was never a cheerleader.
When the war was over, the GIs came home. They resumed their family life, and the birth rate started to increase, and all of a sudden we had a population boom on our hands. That rippled through the rest of the society. All of a sudden we found out, well, these kids have got to go to school. We've got to build more schools. So there were big school drive campaigns back then.
A new high school. It was a dream come true for people on the south side of Indianapolis. Manual High School had originally opened its doors in 1895. In 1953, students moved to a brand new school farther south of town. In the fall of '56, some Shortridge and Broad Ripple students were transferred to a brand new school on the far north side of Marion County. North Central High School was a sign of things to come, as more and more families were moving to suburbs opening up to the north of the city. Although suburbanization had yet to reach the farm communities of Carmel and Fishers. In Indianapolis, if high school students took a bus, it was a city bus, not a school bus. Most schools were close enough that students walked or caught a ride with a friend. High schools were neighborhood schools.
Back in those days, pretty much everybody went to school in the neighborhood or the area that they grew up. So when you went to grade school, your whole goal in life was to hurry up and get through so you could go to the high school because you heard so many great things about what it was going to be like.
We all lived close enough, and in the 50s, school was a very important part of the student's life.
When you think about Indianapolis in the 50s, you think about great community loyalty in each section of the city.
Manual High School was different than the other high schools. You could say it was the Southside School because it was the only Southside high school. We were it. There was no other high school. So we had the territory of the South Side of Indianapolis.
Washington was the West Sider. I mean, you were the West Sider through and through. I mean, you were a West Sider. I mean, and then you had South Siders, North Siders, and the North Side really just didn't think we were quite up to their level.
I think that they envied our special affection for Shortridge.
Indianapolis's oldest high school, Shortridge, was considered by some to be a white-collar college prep school.
They didn't like it. The way we perceived it, they were jealous.
Howe was a middle-class school. The people were, for the most part, blue-collar, some white-collar workers. Howe students, I think, felt like Shortridge and maybe Broad Ripple were where the rich kids went.
It was the one place people could go on the north side, and when I went there, it was great to be at Broad Ripple. You could go to Shortridge, but that was a snob school.
I think we were probably snotty about it.
Arsenal Technical High School on the east side emphasized vocational training.
I took cosmetology.
I did too.
This was a technical school, number one.
During the 1950s, Tech's annual enrollment of over 4,000 students and its 75-acre campus made it one of the largest high schools in the country.
You know, everybody got to know each other. And we all lived almost in the same neighborhoods on the west side of town near Rockfield. So you knew everybody. You know, you grew up with them, you knew them.
Crispus Attucks was Indianapolis's all-black high school. This despite an Indiana statute which outlawed segregation, and a 1954 U.S. Supreme Court decision which ruled the practice unconstitutional. However, students enjoyed a first-rate education. Because they were denied the opportunity to teach elsewhere, more teachers with doctorate degrees taught at Attucks than all the other Indianapolis high schools combined. And the faculty and students shared an immense pride in their high school.
And it was just a friendly atmosphere to have people come from all over the city to attend Crispus Attucks High School.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour.
Most of the parochial schools in Indianapolis were Catholic and single-sex. Two met at 14th and Meridian Streets. Cathedral, the all-boys school, was right next door to St. Agnes Academy, the all-girls high school.
Oh, there was a massive gulf between Cathedral High School and St. Agnes High School. It was called 14th Street.
Well, because you couldn't dilly-dally talking to the boys. It was school time, and, you know, you just had to be thinking of your pure thoughts when you got to school. And boys were not included.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now at the hour of our death. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with you.
Teenagers in the 1950s were perhaps the first young generation to define themselves by their appearance. You had to follow a style to be cool.
Always wore a string of pearls, always. The 4 years I was in high school, a girl could wear nothing but a skirt. You never could wear anything else if it was 20.
I guess maybe your status symbol was how many different pair of Levi's you owned.
Alice was a leader in dress. All of the new ideas came from Alice.
We wore Spaldings, and they were saddle oxfords that had red soles. We kept them polished, and then we'd polish them with white, shoe polish along here, black along here. We'd take these out, we'd wash them in soap and water, hang them up, make sure that our...
You could tell who went to what high school by what they wore.
At our high school, we had the sausage roll socks, which you would put like maybe 2 pairs of tops of socks in there, roll these socks all the way down, and you would have a roll around your ankles. I mean, this was the west side look, whereas maybe the north side look, they rolled their socks up.
You'd go to Washington and the girls all had their socks rolled down. That was a Washington thing. There was a different clothing style, slightly, at each school.
Down and rolled. Down and rolled.
I thought girls who wore their white socks pulled up, I thought that really looked attractive. And when I saw girls wear their white socks rolled down, I thought, ooh, that's kind of like now you would say nerdy or something.
We rolled our socks quite far down, but we did not roll our socks down. That would, you would have been a hood. You would have been not cool. And you had to see your ankle a little bit, didn't you? Well, we tried to have a convertible. That was really important. And then the girls would pile in one convertible, as many as you could get in.
Like we traveled in packs, it's like whole wolf packs of girls and boys and, in their cars.
Today, people refer to it as cruising. In the 50s, it was just checking things out or buzzing. Really, it was just going from one drive-in to another.
We'd always hit the TP first, the North Side TP, which was at 38th and Fall Creek. And you'd spin around that a few times and look for whoever you wanted to see.
And so you make that circuit from the TP to Nobby's and back again 3 or 4 times a night between roughly 8 and midnight, stopping and talking and cruising and talking with people on the way, and that would be an evening's worth of entertainment.
Nobby's was equipped with speaker phones, which allowed passengers to order their meals without ever having to get out of the car. Across from the teepee, Merrill's High-Decker featured a radio DJ up on the roof. Up in Rocky Ripple, on the north side, there was the Rendezvous.
One of the great pastimes was called buzzing the Devu. And this meant that you got in a car, you went to the rendezvous, and you just drove around and around and around, looking to see other people and to be seen. It was very important to be seen at the Devu, to know that you were in the swing of things and you were one of the hip people.
It was a ritual. You just went to the drive-in. And I think maybe one reason is because it was kind of a microcosm of teenage life at the time, or high school life. All the little cliques were there. The athletes would hang out in their leather sweaters, even if it was 98 degrees at Edelmont. The girls, who were the ones who were most sought after, would drive around rather snobbishly in their cars, not paying attention to what was going on. And then there were the rest of us, the kids that you'd never notice in the hall. There were two teepees. The North Side teepee was considered a hangout for high school kids who went to Shortridge or Broad Ripple. The South Side teepee was where manual kids hung out.
That wasn't our turf. It took a lot of courage to go to the South Side teepee. That was, we were foreign turf.
The North Side, the East Side, the West Side, all these were like separate duchies or something. They were in Europe. It was very disconnected.
Out on the West Side, the Pole Drive-In was the hub of teen activity.
You had regions that you go to, like you can go to the East Side and go to Al's Drive-In, and it was okay to go to because along with the meal, you got a free movie. He had old movies that he would run in a drive-in theater kind of atmosphere, so you went over there for a cheap date.
Southsiders could also buzz the Southern Circle Drive-In.
Cruising would be down 31 to the Southern Circle and then around and around and around.
Drove around and around and around.
Cruising was just essentially going around in the circle all the time. There was nothing. So you might stop and get a Coke, a hamburger, and pull in. The idea, if you're a group of guys, 4 guys in a car, you pull in next to a car with 4 girls in it, and you order something, and you start a conversation in between the cars, and maybe get phone numbers and set up a date or something like that. That's how those things kind of worked back then. They were relatively innocent.
Around, and we'd qualify, or making our laps to see who was there, and jump in a car and talk, and that's just about the extent of it.
And we just got to go around in circles endlessly, hoping something would happen. Of course, nothing ever did.
It was part of the frustration of the time. It was just sort of like, it was the time. It was a lot about looking and fantasizing, rather than things happening. So that was a perfect symbol for it, was driving around in the car and looking out the window, hoping that something would happen, or hoping you would meet this great girl and whatever would happen.
No matter how you wore your bobby socks or which drive-in you chose to buzz, there was one place where all the high schools came together. It happened at the same time each year, a magical event known simply as the Butler Sectional.
It was great, it was where everyone in the city of Indianapolis wanted to play.
Oh man, the Butler Sectional. That was the event of the whole year.
We lived, breathed, imbibed, and just camped out at the Butler Fieldhouse. It was a social experience. It was a cross-section of Indianapolis.
But sectional was everything. Sectional was the coming together, and it was, when you realize how many teams were in the sectionals.
16 high school basketball teams from around the city and county met at what was then Butler Fieldhouse to battle it out. Play was continuous. Students were allowed out of school all day Friday to watch their team play.
You got an excused absence for going to the sectionals.
Lots to eat, a whole atmosphere of excitement and screaming, and your voice completely gone after it was over, and tragedy and high comedy and triumph, all the emotions you could possibly have vented at the sectionals.
Probably, we started planning probably in November or December what we were going to wear.
Competition was always tough, but one team in 1955 marched into the Butler Sectional with added momentum. Crispus Attucks had lost just one game during the regular season. Even more remarkable was the fact that up until the early 50s, Attucks wasn't even allowed to play the same city schools that attended the Butler Sectional.
And of course, we couldn't participate in any of the games with the other high schools in the city because they didn't play us because we were an all-black school.
Most of our schedule was black schools,
and they were not only the black schools here in Indiana, which was Gary Roosevelt, Evansville, Lincoln. We would go to Louisville, Cincinnati, St. Louis, all the way to Tulsa, Oklahoma, to find black schools to play.
Say, Tech is rough and Tech is tough. They can beat everybody, but they can't beat us.
The crazy song was the Attics' pep cheer.
Oh, skip, bop, beat 'em, that's the crazy song.
When the Attics Tigers finally began playing the other city schools, they dominated. And the crazy song became a familiar cry in gyms all over the county.
We knew if there's 2 or 3 minutes left to go in the game, and we leading by 5 or 10 points, we started singing. Yada, 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 yo.
But everybody knew Heidi, 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 hi, Heidi, 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 ho. Oh, skip, bop, beat 'em. That's the crazy song.
In 1955, Crispus Attucks won the coveted Butler Sectional, their 3rd straight. Led by legendary number 43, Oscar Robertson, Attucks was poised to go even farther.
But we knew we had a good team. We have a lot of good teams in the city tournament sectional, really, as well. But, you know, it was just a matter of destiny, really, and fate, where it came out. But we had a very good basketball team, and we were not to be denied.
In the final game, Attucks played another all-black school, Gary Roosevelt, for the 1955 state title. Indianapolis rallied around its black high school.
We became the team, the city team, in that final game. It was not Crispus Attucks at that particular time. It was Indianapolis Attucks. Oscar Robertson from the corner.
The place was packed. They didn't even have standing room left. They had to keep the outside doors closed because they had no place for the people to go.
Attucks won the 1955 state championship. City teams once refused to play Attucks. Ironically, it became the first Indianapolis school to win a state basketball title.
A tear came in my eyes. I said, my goodness. I said, look what we've done. Oh, it felt great. I mean, it felt good. I knew that when we got out of there, I mean, you know, we just felt like, wow, look what we overcame.
Indianapolis had its first state champion in Attucks, and it was a pride in the whole city that really helped, I think, break down a lot of the color barriers because those kids belonged to Indianapolis.
I think by Attucks being successful in basketball really gave people a lot better outlook on life, because I don't think there was much for blacks to look forward to other than going to jobs and with a dead end door there.
Because here we now were recognized by the state. And through the years, we hadn't even been recognized in the city because we were the city schools would play because we were black.
Old Charlotte may be tough, and old Manual may be rough, but they can beat everybody, but they can't beat us. And we knew it.
Stay tuned. We'll take a seat out at the track and watch the 500 in the 50s. And there was something new in the air. We'll look in on early television. That's all next when we come back to Indy in the 50s.
Indy in the 50s is made possible in part by viewers like you and by Stuart Richardson and Associates, providing court reporting services to the legal community of Indiana.
8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, now.
Like most of America, Indianapolis citizens were scared red about the bomb and of communist Russia, which held it over their heads. The The Cold War was especially chilly for Indianapolis, and the extended forecast called for below normal temperatures.
Always remember, the flash of an atomic bomb can come at any time, no matter where you may be.
It was cold enough to build bomb shelters. However, a warm reception greeted Vice President and fierce anti-communist Richard Nixon at a 1956 campaign rally. "I will not pooh-pooh the communist menace at home or abroad," Nixon told a cheering audience gathered on Monument Circle. In the 1950s, Indianapolis would make a name for itself as a city on the home front of the Cold War.
Indianapolis, stand by. There was a big event here, a big political uproar, when there was a chapter founded of the American Civil Liberties Union, and that was thought of evidently here as what they would have called a pinko organization, leaning towards communist views.
Professor Ralph F. Fuchs of the Indiana University School of Law and at least 60 other Indianapolis citizens wished to start an Indiana chapter of the ACLU. They requested and were granted permission to hold their charter meeting in the auditorium of the Indiana War Memorial. But at the other end of the mall, the American Legion, a national veterans group, protested vehemently.
The Indiana Department of the American Legion, with documentary evidence in hand of the facts that the speaker for the meeting of the ACLU has subscribed to and been a member of organizations listed as subversive.
Amidst controversy, the memorial's management suddenly canceled the ACLU's request. After being denied access to several meeting places around town, the ACLU finally ended up holding its first meeting in the basement of St. Mary's Catholic Church.
And Edward R. Murrow, who was the top TV journalist of the era, came to Indianapolis and did a documentary on that whole issue.
With CBS Television presents the distinguished reporter and news analyst Edward R. Murrow in See It Now.
The controversy aired across the nation.
What a travesty it would be to open its doors for a meeting to which communists are welcome.
Dan Wakefield was a student in New York City at the time.
The New York Times had an editorial about it called Liberty in Indianapolis. So I wrote a letter to the Star, which I said, I'm a student, I'm at Columbia. I hate to see Indianapolis, which I love, having this image of a prejudiced kind of place and so on and so forth. So I wrote the letter, and I kind of forgot about it, and then it was printed in the Star right when I got home for summer vacation. And man, the phone was ringing, and people were calling up my mother and father and saying, it's really too bad that your son has, gone to Columbia and gotten these radical views and these un-American views. And
the CBS broadcast featured Marguerite Dice, one of the Indianapolis citizens who protested the ACLU meeting. A few years later, both Dice and her simple house at 3650 Washington Boulevard would play a major role in the Cold War against communism. Robert Welch, an East Coast businessman and vocal anti-communist, called for a national organization to, quote, play a leading role in stopping and routing the international communist conspiracy. He looked for a place to meet. Dice volunteered her home. And on December 8, 1958, 12 men from all over the country gathered in Marguerite Dice's living room. Gentlemen, began Welch, let me welcome you to Indianapolis. What came out of that two-day meeting was the Blue Book, the charter for a semi-secret organization bent on quashing communism all over the world. Named in honor of a fallen World War II Army captain, the John Birch Society was founded in a home on the north side of Indianapolis. The Cold War got a little chillier that December. Indianapolis summer, those with a club membership might go for a swim at the Riviera Club near Broad Ripple. Southsiders might cool off in the giant pool at Longacre. Others might take a dip over on the far west side of town at Westlake. At night, Westlake was a good place to take a date. You could dance in the pavilion, which had a rollaway roof. Or you could really get cozy at the Westlake Drive-In Theater. During the summer, younger kids might have enjoyed taking a run down the newly built Soapbox Derby Hill at Riverside Park. And not far from there, at the Riverside Amusement Park, the day wasn't over until you took a ride on each of the 2 wooden roller coasters, the Thriller and the Flash. Of course, Indianapolis had its boys of summer, the minor league Indianapolis Indians. In 1956, when the team came under financial difficulties, the people of Indianapolis literally bailed them out of debt. 6,672 fans became bona fide shareholders of the Indianapolis Indians organization. And hula hoops were all the rage in Indianapolis.
I didn't have a specific color, but I remember people had their own color. They had to have a blue one, or an orange one, or a yellow one, or a red one.
In 1958, they held a hula hoop contest over at the new Glendale Mall, and 8-year-old Gregory Gooch won first place. Of course, the entire world looked in on a summertime ritual held each May on the far west side of Indianapolis.
I grew up here, and at that time I had no idea how big that the Indianapolis Motor Speedway and the 500 itself was worldwide. It was just something that happened here every May.
The oval has always measured 2.5 miles in circumference, but there were some things that looked a little different back in the 50s. The main straightaway at the Brickyard was still paved with the original bricks. And race fans will remember the pagoda that stood as the scorer's tower through the better half of the 1950s. The cars seemed simpler back then.
I mean, you didn't feed a bunch of information into a computer and the thing gave you the answers. I mean, you just built the thing. They didn't have wind tunnel testing. How fast was it going to go? I don't know. You'd build it and try it and put it on the racetrack, and that's how you'd find out.
And the drivers seemed just as modest as their machines.
It was almost a blue-collar sport. Yeah, a lot of the drivers were average Joes. Many of them came here with not very much money in their pocket.
Many of the drivers couldn't afford hotel rooms, so they simply boarded with one of the local families.
The east half of the basement, it was set up dormitory style with military cots and little end tables between for the rest of the mechanics. The most people we had stay here at one time was in 1954, we had 17 people besides the 4 Audis that lived here, my mother, dad, my brother, and myself.
John Audi remembers back to his childhood and one particular house guest who would come and stay each summer. He was race car driver Jimmy Bryan.
Upstairs on the east side in the east dormer is the biggest bedroom in the house, and that was for Jimmy Bryan. And he'd sit on the couch and was just a member of the Audi family. He'd eat breakfast, lunch, dinner. Sometimes he'd take us out and bring food home.
When Jimmy Bryan won the Indianapolis 500 in 1958, he simply drove the pace car back to the Audis.
And he and Lou, his wife, came home and he laid down in the front yard, right here behind me where the sidewalk is, and wrestled with me and my brother and our dog Pepper, still in his yellow uniform. The race crowd was leaving, and as they walked by, they parked, as they do every year here in the neighborhoods, just like they do now, with their coolers. They completely ignored him and had no idea that the man laying here in the front yard had just won the 500 in front of him.
And then he got called in the house to get ready to go out to dinner.
Gentlemen, start your engine.
In the 1950s, 500 miles was a lot longer.
The heat is taking a tremendous toll on men and machines. Scarborough can't go on.
These were all tough he-men, and the heat of the cockpit had become so great that 16, 17 laps was about all that anybody could stay in.
Up through the middle of the 1950s, it sometimes took more than one driver to complete a race.
Bob Scott comes on as relief driver.
Rookie A.J. Foyt made his debut at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway in 1958. He spun out on lap 148. Billy Vukovich was one of the popular drivers in the 1950s. He won the 53 and 54 races back-to-back.
And then nobody had won 3 years in a row, and still hasn't. And so he had an excellent opportunity to do that in 55 and lost his life.
In time, the track changed. They tore down the pagoda in 1956. And as more and more drivers started to raise big-time sponsorship money, fewer and fewer chose to bunk with local families. And John Oddie received some terrible news in 1960.
And my dad came out and told me to sit down, that Jimmy'd been killed. And it was like losing a big brother. And that was the last race driver that we ever kept in the house, because it just was it hurt too bad.
Indianapolis Motor Speedway, proving ground of progress for the automobile of tomorrow.
Fittingly, the city's first television broadcast centered around the Speedway. TV came into Indianapolis homes on May 30th, 1949. After airing test patterns for weeks, television station WFBM broadcast Crucible of Speed, a half-hour documentary about the 500-mile race. Channel 6 then aired live coverage of the 1949 500. Television was another one of those new appliances that came into our home. Each night, entire families would camp out in front of this magical piece of furniture. We're still trying to measure the impact TV has had on the family and on the world. In the 1950s, this city played a part in the television revolution. Or to put it more accurately, Indianapolis made parts for early television. At one time, the RCA plant over on the east side of Indianapolis employed 8,200 workers to make components for television sets. It helped mass-produce television receivers that were among the first to show up in living rooms all over the United States. Ironically, they were making TV sets over at RCA even before Indianapolis had a TV station. And when stations finally did go up on the airwaves, there still wasn't much to watch. Not that the discriminating Indianapolis viewer minded much.
So we used to come on the air at WTTV at 2 o'clock with our test pattern and tone signal. And we were on for 2 hours before the programming started at 4. Well, at that time, we had a test pattern which was the head of an Indian, full headdress. And one day, for some reason, I'm not sure why, the engineers decided to change to the test pattern that you're most familiar with today, which is a circular type of design. About a day or 2 days later, we started getting letters. We also got phone calls saying, "Where's the Indian? We like the Indian. Bring the Indian back." So in those days, even the test pattern got fan mail.
WTTV was the second station to sign on the air. In 1949, Channel 10, later to become Channel 4, began broadcasting out of its Bloomington studios. But distant Indianapolis viewers were able to receive a snowy picture. Bloomington, Indiana, by the way, held the distinction of being the smallest city in the world to have its own TV station. For years, WFBM and WTTV were the only stations Indianapolis viewers could find in the local TV listings. Together, the two stations aired programs from all three television networks until WISH-TV came on the dial as Channel 8 in 1954. Channel 13, WLWI, signed on the air as an ABC affiliate in 1957. While the networks were creating programs during what is commonly referred to as the golden age of television, Indianapolis stations were pioneering local TV. But that's not to say it was always golden. WISH-TV's Debbie Drake was probably the first person in Indianapolis to encourage couch potatoes to get up and do something.
And you'll feel much better than overindulging in extra pastries and breads and fattening foods. Well, right now, let's do a warm-up. And our hands in front, and then touch behind, and stretch, and...
No doubt some couch potatoes were content to just sit and watch Debbie. Channel 13 broadcast Kindergarten College, a daily children's program. And the Co-op Hayloft Frolic came out of WTTV's Bloomington studios, featuring Bobby Helms, who would later go on to cut the hit single, Jingle Bell Rock. Until Channel 8 got a hold of one of the industry's first videotape machines in 1958, all local television was live, even the commercials. But there was never a lack of material.
You see what happened here in the 50s. Every musician, every entertainer was dying to get on television in some way. And I'm sure they weren't making much money. But if they could find a sponsor, they could walk in and they could get 15 minutes. We had people playing the organ, people singing.
Kenny Jagger, a local lounge entertainer, had his own 15-minute organ show on WFBM. But WFBM's contribution to Indianapolis television was more than just organ music. Hollywood film actress Frances Farmer settled here in Indianapolis and hosted Frances Farmer Presents on Channel 6.
I think, first of all, I want to say what a wonderful day it's been for us as judges during here watching this contest.
WFBM also broadcast this city's first television news. Gilbert Forbes, who for many years was heard on Indianapolis radio, became Indianapolis's first television news anchor. Late in the 1950s, a youthful Howard Caldwell would join him at the news desk. WFBM hired Bill Crawford as this city's first TV meteorologist. He became so popular that he often led the newscast. Interestingly, weather forecasting was Bill's part-time job. He was a dentist.
So he'd be a dentist all day and then come down and do that early weather, go home for dinner, and come back and do the late weather.
If you weren't tuned in to one of the new TV stations in the 1950s, then most likely you were listening to Indianapolis radio and DJs like Easy Gwynn on WIBC. Most teenagers dialed in to hear the antics of WIBC's Bouncin' Bill Baker.
You're listening to Baker and Company on records here. The temperature now 7 degrees.
Well, at our peak, I think we were somewhere in the area of about 47.5% of the audience. I was supposed to have the largest per capita audience in the country.
All right, here we are from 9 till 10. Stay tuned to 1070. Be listening to then. Music is canned as we planned here. Records and transcriptions of all descriptions, clipping across the kilocycles, mutilating the modulation of these. Your
Bouncin' Bill was Indianapolis radio's original morning team, although there was just one of him.
I was more of an entertainer than just an announcer or a jock. I did about 20 character voices.